Friends, I want to come to you today in a very difficult time in the life of our continent, in the life of our culture, and in the life of our world. We are all feeling, I think, the barrenness and the spiritual barrenness and the personal barrenness that comes from isolation and the threat to life of a virus. And it's like we're a barren and a parched land, and we're feeling the effects of it in so many areas, particularly amongst the poor, amongst those who are concerned about the future of their work. It's a time of uncertainty. So when an event such as that which happened in the United States with George Floyd occurs, it is like a spark setting off a fire in a barren world. It compounds the sense of suffering and pain that many people feel. And I want to say simply that I share your pain and we share your pain. And I know that it's being expressed throughout the Christian church all over the world. But I want to speak to you personally about the issue of race. And I want to do so because my whole life has been engaged with this very important issue. When I was a young boy growing up in Bermuda in the 1960s, I encountered all the tensions that arise from the integration of schools. My father was a school teacher in what was then an only black boys' school. And it was a time of integration in the country. It was fraught with all manner of difficulties and stresses and conflicts. And in the midst of it all, our family, and my father in particular, sought to bring a sense of justice and a sense of righteous inclusion to the whole debate. He did so in a very practical way. But I remember a text that my father had above his desk. It is from 2 Corinthians, and it reads, "Look at no one from a human point of view." That we looked at Christ from that human point of view, we must do so no longer. We should look then at everyone from the point of view of God's grace and God's love, not from our own biases, whatever they may be. To see then everyone as a child of God. This was a major theme in our household, and one that I've never forgot and tried to emulate, as difficult as it is at times. The second event was when we moved to South Africa in the 1970s. During the apartheid era, again, my father was minister of a congregational church in Cape Town. And these were, in fact, many of the very darkest days of apartheid. We had arrived after Soweto. We had arrived after the death of Stephen Biko. And I, in a sense, felt almost empowered to be able to deal with those issues from having had a degree in political science and comparative African government and law from the University of Cape Town. And I was all fired up to change the world. But my world was shocked and it was rocked when in the Eastern Cape during the school boycotts of the early 1980s, I witnessed unprecedented violence towards young black youth. And my heart was broken and I felt a sense of powerlessness. But I was reminded of that incredible passage from the book of Philippians, where Paul says this: "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interest of the others." It was, in a sense, for the others that my heart went out. And I prayed I would never witness or never see that kind of violence against a person of color again. So you can see, when something occurs like it did in the United States, it brings back all of those memories for me. we still need to look out for the other, especially in this world. A third event was when I took race and law at the Harvard Law School with the professor, black professor, Randall Kennedy. And we talked about all the laws of racism and slavery, from the Jim Crow laws to Dred Scott versus Sanford and Plessy versus Ferguson and Brown and the Board of Education. All of these will mean a lot to my American friends. But these laws revealed some deep-seated problems and a history that had been there. But I was introduced for the first time while I was there to a writer and a thinker that hitherto I had not encountered, but of course now is famous, and his name is Frederick Douglass. And in a sermon at Timothy Eaton a couple of years ago, I quoted from something that he said on May the 11th, 1847 in New York, when as a child of slavery he stood up and spoke after having been in Britain for many years, or a number of years speaking, number of times. He wrote this: "I have no patriotism, I have no country. What country have I? The institutions of the country do not know me, do not recognize me as a man. I am not thought of or spoken of in any direction out of the anti-slavery ranks as a man. I am not thought of or spoken of except as a piece of property belonging to some Christian slaveholder. All the religious and political institutions in this country pronounce me as a slave and chattel. Now, in such a country as this, I cannot have patriotism. The only thing that links me to this land is my family and the painful consciousness that there are 3 million of my fellow creatures groaning beneath the iron rod of the worst despotism that could be devised." As someone from the slave community, he felt he'd lost his sense of patriotism. And I think that there are many even today who feel that they don't necessarily love their country in the way that they would like to or want to. And this is a great shame and a great pity. And it's gone on for a long time. But one of the most joyful encounters I had a few years ago was at the Indianapolis 500 when I was preaching to large crowds, and there was a prayer breakfast on the Saturday morning, and the guests were the Tuskegee Airmen, the remaining 1 or 2 that were left from that famous flying group that were African American. They were black. And I had the privilege of being at the table of honor with them. And we sat and we talked, and it was emotional and it was moving, and they were magnificent older men. And they kind of moved my heart. And I talked about what it must have been like to have been set apart as a person of color and to have their own flying regiment. And one of them just simply stated the words of Jesus, that whatever was going on, he said, "Greater love hath no man than this, than he lay down his life for his friends." He said, we did it for our country. We did it for our nation. I was touched. And I'll never forget the Tuskegee Airmen. So in this current situation, a few things that I can say have arisen from my experience for what it is. I've never been arrested or pulled aside because of the color of my skin, so I really don't know what it's like. But if people protest peacefully, they should be heard. We should be, as the Bible says in the book of James, quick to listen to the hurts of others. We must seek to see the undergirding problems of injustice, and we should be passionate and of one voice to deal with them wherever injustice arises or inequity presents itself. And most of all, we should see each other through the eyes of Christ. Enough of defining people by the color of their skin. It's even more than Martin Luther King said, the content of their character. It goes even beyond that. It is the fact that we are children of God. And if children of God, we all deserve respect and a peaceful and a just world. Thank you for giving me this moment with you. And may God bless our world. Amen.